Here at Bishop's Castle Primary School in rural Shropshire, Victoria Palmer teaches a class of mainly Year 2s, the oldest Year 1s and some Year 3s. She asked dancer Rachel Freeman to help her plan and teach a lesson about the human body, linking dance and science. In the lesson, Victoria and Rachel introduced different body parts and how they move, and encouraged the children to observe what happens to their bodies before and after exercise. Victoria and Primary Science Advisor Chris Robinson are now looking back at what went on to discuss how successful this has been.
You chose to teach this lesson through team teaching with Rachel, the dancer. It did have the potential to go quite wildly wrong, didn't it?
Yes, especially if you've not worked with somebody before, which was the case. Well, Rachel and I planned the lesson together.
Hello, Rachel.
Hi, Victoria. How are you doing?
Lovely to see you again.
I'd like to do something on exercise and how the body responds to exercise. So I thought that would fit in well with the dance.
That's perfect,
yes. And also body parts.
Okay.
We discussed what my role could be while Rachel was delivering the dance aspects.
You can develop that with a partner. It's quite nice working in partners.
That would be good. So I could take perhaps some photographs at that point.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
then
that
I
would be
could
good.
use them later on and we could refer back to those body parts.
Yeah.
At one point when I was planning it, I thought, do we really want to do the dance and then the science, or should we not be going back into the classroom to do the science recording? It seemed very unusual to be doing that. But having gone through that process, I feel it was important to do that because it was straight after the activity and it made it more meaningful for them.
I think it's much more realistic to do it in the hall, and you've chosen a simple recording system so that it didn't interrupt the flow.
We're going to be measuring your temperature before you start to dance. So you're going to be recording that here.
How do you differentiate usually in your science? Because you had got 3 year groups in there, hadn't you? Year 1 to Year 3 across key stage class.
So I differentiated it in terms of Science 1, in terms of the recording and the measurement for the older children, recording on their own, becoming more independent in the investigation process.
You're looking for the green section.
Even though the younger children had a chance to use the thermometers, their comments were, oh, it's green here and it was here before.
Okay, now we're going to put our hands on our faces. I want you to have a little think about the temperature of your hands and your face. Are your hands cold and your face warm? Or are your hands warm and your face cold?
She was getting them to feel their bodies, wasn't she?
So it would access it for the younger and less able children to do it in a sensory way first. But for the older children, it needed to move on to measurement quite quickly.
What do you think is going to happen to your temperature when we're doing our dancing? Have a little chat to the person next to you about what you think might change.
One of the things you decided to incorporate into the lesson was opportunities for the children to do some speaking and listening.
I use a lot of talking activities with the children because I find if I'm just doing the question and answer sessions, it's usually the more confident children that will answer. Whereas if I give them opportunity to talk to a partner about it, I can listen in and get little gems of information that I might not normally get.
When you run around, you'll be like really hot and you're running.
I was expecting them to predict beforehand what might happen when they exercised. And I was surprised really how good those predictions were.
Yes, they had some prior knowledge that they brought
didn't
to their
they?
predictions.
I think it will get hotter because we're going to be warming our bodies up. You get fitter.
You're going to get fitter. Anything else?
When your heart beats, that means you're running faster.
Let's stretch a knee to the outside. So knee goes outside and we'll have an elbow going into the middle.
Well, we started with the warm-up where she was focusing on the different body parts.
I noticed that she used such a broad range of vocabulary. It gave them a real reason for recognising that vocabulary and making contact to do a task, wasn't it?
And the next part of the lesson, Rachel was asking them to say what movements they'd done with the different body parts. And that's when I was scribing down, circling, twizzling, twirling.
It certainly stimulated some useful language for them, didn't it?
It's quite a luxury, really, to have somebody like Rachel in a lesson teaching the dance side of it. It was quite unusual for me to be able to step back almost and take the photographs and do the scribing, because that's not normal in my role.
How are you going to use those when you get back into the class?
I want to use the words alongside the photographs. So here we had feet and head together. Use a photograph and ask children to cut and paste the verbs, put them on the computer, and then move them around to make poems or lines to describe what was happening in those photographs.
Dance, I think, did inject something new into teaching of that part of the curriculum.
I certainly learnt a lot from Rachel in the terms of organising a dance lesson. And having done that, I think I could perhaps reproduce that again.
Because I felt watching it, I could see the build-up, because she started with single body parts, then she tried two together, then she matched in partners, and then she did moving sequences. So there was a system, wasn't there, to the lesson. And I think sometimes we just say, or wave your arms about, or run from here to here.
Or do 5 jumps, or...
Yes. And that was much more stimulating for them.
Feel your heartbeat.
This is when they're feeling their heartbeats. You could actually hear the heavy breathing in the room.
Yes.
I wondered if I could do something to do with the heartbeats or the breathing, but the moment you try and count breathing or heartbeats, it's quite difficult for this age group to do, isn't it?
It is. It's probably a little bit beyond this age group. They're just beyond Key Stage 1, even the oldest ones.
How does your body feel compared to before we started? Alice?
We felt colder. Now it's hotter because we've been moving around.
However, I think they have gained a sense of how their bodies are gearing up when they do rigorous exercise.
Yes, here's Zoe. She actually was quite red in the face.
Zoe skin is red, but before she was white.
And Tegan had picked up on that.
I think with the older children, you might have asked them for additional observations. They might have also been set another challenge, say, using as many of the movements or body parts as they could to make them as hot as possible, something like that, so that they had to perhaps go to a corner and try something additional.
You're on 36. 37. 36.
There wasn't much of a temperature change for the older children. I think some of them were noticing that. It had only gone up by 1 or 2 degrees. But as a next step, you could introduce a digital thermometer. That would work very well.
And did you notice the little lad who put it on his foot? And he actually said that he thought his feet were hotter because he was using his feet more.
Have you been using your feet or your hands more, do you think?
My feet are running around.
I thought that would be an interesting avenue to explore further with them,
Yes.
to look at the different body parts and measure temperature of those.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how much difference we'd get, though, with different body parts using those thermometers. What do you think? Would they be accurate enough?
I think they'd be accurate enough, and I would tend to just look at the temperature as a scale and moving the green dot along that scale. So I would look at comparative language of hotter than, cooler than, rather than probably the numbers, because I don't think the number difference in degrees centigrade would be very great. So you've got quite a good springboard for new investigations.
Yes. Oh, somebody wanted to know if your hair got hot.
Do you think your hair gets hotter than your ear? Or do you think that even happens?
That'd be a good one to try.
The only thing that's allowed to touch the floor is your hip and one hand. That's your back. Your hip is at the side, isn't it?
This cross-curricular lesson worked very well, but there are dangers, aren't there, that we think sometimes we can just put 2 areas together and the learning in both will be good, when actually it can water down both. They need to be made very clear about what it is as an outcome, as a scientist and as a dancer. what is good science and what is good dancing.
It would have been good to have some time at the end to reflect more on how they'd behaved as scientists, because although they had chance to reflect on their learning in science, they didn't have time to reflect on, well, actually, what have we done in a scientific way today?
That would certainly have added to the quality, wouldn't it?
These are some of the things you said about how your bodies moved while you were dancing. You were stretching with your bodies. What body parts were you stretching?
Elbows and our heads. Legs and arms.
Legs and arms.
And noses.
Your noses.
If you were to do it again, you might just look to how you challenge a little bit more those year threes in Key Stage 2, asking a little bit more of them in the recording. Perhaps repeat recordings of their measurements, and just to make a simple conclusion from them.
So how would
an
they
oral
do that?
conclusion. When they've got their chart of measurements, you might say to them, I expect you in the next 5 minutes to make a statement that we can all hear about what you think your results show.
Did anything surprise you? Is there anything that happened that you didn't think would happen?
I predicted that that I would sweat, but I was actually quite surprised because I didn't sweat at all.
A couple of days later, I asked them what they'd learned from this experience, and they still remembered it. So it was really fixed in their memories, and they'd obviously learnt a lot about the dance because they were talking about they didn't always have to do the same, so they knew about working with a partner and one being able to do something different from the other. But in terms of the science, they were thinking about other avenues that they wanted to explore, and some really interesting ideas. Were their knees hotter than their elbows? And they remembered those body parts.
Yes.
And I'm sure they wouldn't have been talking about those if we'd just been sticking labels on pictures and labelling body parts.
What do you think would happen if we carried on exercises? Owen,
You'd keep breathing faster and faster and faster
why do you think that would happen, Owen?
because you would be running and you wouldn't be taking much air in because you would be too busy running.
Right, thank you.
What was difficult for me was swapping from my facilitator role while I was there with the scribe and the camera to going back into teacher mode. And it happened quite at a pace, and that was difficult to think, all right, I need to be doing this next.
So what would the lesson look like the next time you teach this part of the science curriculum?
Well, I need to take on board your ideas about extending different recording styles for the older children and giving them more independence to work on their own away from the rest of the class. So I'd incorporate that next time. I'd definitely link the dance with the science again because it was such a creative way of involving the children and getting them to think about their body parts without even realising they were doing it, quite honestly.
Absolutely.